Specialist Emily Hawk Dawson crouched behind the ridge overlooking the desert valley, adjusting her scope for yet another routine practice drill, feeling the familiar rhythm of breath, heartbeat, and calculations flowing through her as she measured wind speed, air density, and the minute tremors of her surroundings, when a voice from the opposing sniper team broke the monotony, casual but sharp, daring her to attempt the impossible. 3,800 meters, and for a moment Emily paused, the weight of the challenge settling like a stone in her chest, because every sniper she had trained with knew the human and environmental limits at that distance were near absolute, yet there was something intoxicating about the dare, a thrill that sparked her focus, sharpened her senses, and demanded she step beyond hesitation, and as the rival sniper smirked, leaning against his cover, confident, almost arrogant in tone, she felt the eyes of every instructor and trainee on the ridge, some whispering doubt, some anticipating disaster. Yet Emily remained calm, her mind running through every variable, from wind currents shaped by the canyon to the curvature of the earth that would subtly shift the bullet's path over 3,800 meters, and she adjusted her rifle meticulously, checking scope alignment, verifying ammunition, recalibrating every adjustment for temperature, humidity, and mirage distortion, because at this distance, even the slightest miscalculation could send a bullet hundreds of meters astray, and as she exhaled slowly, her finger resting lightly on the trigger, she reminded herself of the countless hours spent learning patience, focus, and precision, knowing that confidence alone would not carry her through, and as the rival sniper leaned further, clearly expecting failure, Emily whispered under her breath a quiet acknowledgement of the challenge, almost to herself, almost a promise, and then she adjusted her scope, factoring in not only wind, but Coriolis effect, gravity, humidity, and temperature gradients, each adjustment small but cumulative, and as she tracked the distant target, a small training structure barely visible across the valley, she noted the subtle sway of the flag at the top, the faint shimmer of heat waves along the terrain, and even the distant hum of vehicles and personnel movement that could influence microcurrents, all of which would affect trajectory over the impossible distance. And as she steadied her breathing, controlled the slightest tremor in her hands, and focused on the minute calculations that would make or break the shot, a hush fell across the observation ridge, the silence punctuated only by the faint whisper of wind and the distant chirp of desert wildlife, because everyone knew that the impossible was being attempted, and even failure would be legendary in its audacity, yet Emily refused to let nerves dictate the outcome, relying instead on skill, preparation, and instinct, and as she adjusted her angle one final time, aligning her crosshairs with the target, she considered the implications, not just the dare, but the assertion that she was capable of achieving what few thought humanly possible. And as she exhaled fully, squeezed the trigger, and watched the bullet leave the barrel, the projectile arcing across the desert valley, invisible to the naked eye, Emily held her breath, heart steady, mind calculating, visualizing every meter of the flight, knowing that at this distance, seconds felt like hours, and the margin of error was microscopic, and as the bullet reached its apex, crossed the valley, adjusted subtly for the cumulative effects of physics and nature, and struck the target perfectly, causing the tiny training flag to collapse. A gasp went through the observation ridge, instructors frozen, rival snipers wide-eyed, some in disbelief, some grudging respect, and Emily lowered her rifle slowly, feeling the weight of what had just been accomplished, knowing that the impossible had been achieved, that the dare had been accepted and conquered, and that she had proven not just to the arrogant rival but to herself that precision, focus, patience, and nerve could bend even the strictest limits of human skill. And as she allowed herself a brief smile, the rival sniper scowled, muttering under his breath, his confidence shattered, while Emily's teammates and instructors began whispering among themselves, some taking notes, some shaking their heads in awe, all aware that they had just witnessed something extraordinary, because Emily Hawk Dawson had taken the impossible shot, and in doing so, begun a quiet legend that would follow her through every training exercise, live operation, and battlefield challenge yet to come. And as the wind shifted across the valley, carrying with it the scent of dust, sand, and adrenaline, Emily scanned the horizon once more, already thinking about the next target, the next challenge, and the next test of skill, knowing that the impossible had just become her new baseline, and that her story, her legend, was only beginning to unfold in whispered awe, quiet respect, and disbelief at the power, precision, and nerve of a sniper who dared the impossible, and won. After the impossible 3,800-meter shot that stunned instructors, rival snipers, and teammates alike, Specialist Emily Hawk Dawson didn't allow herself a moment of celebration. Instead, she meticulously began analyzing every detail of the shot, every calculation, every environmental factor that had contributed to its success, because in her world, mastery was measured not by a single victory but by understanding, improving and anticipating the next challenge. And as she adjusted her scope for the next series of drills, she measured wind shifts across the valley, calculating minute changes in speed and direction, factoring in temperature gradients that could subtly alter air density, and even considering the faint Coriolis effect that would nudge a bullet slightly off course over extreme distances, all while keeping her breathing steady, heartbeat slow, and muscles relaxed, because tension could ruin precision, and instinct alone could not replace disciplined calculation. And as she plotted the trajectory for a new target at a similar impossible distance, she mentally ran through dozens of variables, from mirage shimmer along heated sand to subtle elevation differences that could shift the bullet path by meters, while simultaneously observing the behavior of her teammates, noting how some were awestruck, others skeptical, and a few openly resentful of the attention she was receiving. And Emily allowed herself only a flicker of awareness of the human element, because in the end, skill, calculation, and timing were the only things that mattered. And as she aligned her crosshairs on the distant target, she made adjustments in thousandths of a degree, micro-adjustments in scope tension, and even the angle of her cheek against the stock, because at 3,800 meters, these infinitesimal details determined life or failure, success or missed opportunity. And as she exhaled fully, she plotted for the wind at multiple elevations, accounting for subtle eddies created by ridges and rocks, the curvature of the Earth itself influencing the trajectory, and the slight deflection caused by atmospheric pressure changes, each factor analyzed in her mind, cross-referenced against training data, past shots, and instinct honed over countless hours of practice. And as she adjusted her aim, she imagined the bullet's path, visualizing every centimeter, every degree of drop, every minute deflection, allowing her mind to anticipate and correct for variables that most snipers would never even consider. And as she prepared to fire, a gust of wind shifted across the ridge, and she calmly recalculated, adjusting her scope, breadth, and angle, because hesitation or panic could undo even perfect preparation. And as she squeezed the trigger, the rifle whispered in response, the projectile leaving the barrel with perfect velocity, carrying her calculations over the vast desert valley, invisible to every eye but guided with lethal precision by anticipation, skill, and absolute focus. And as the bullet flew, she watched the distant target, calculating its movement, predicting the effect of crosswinds, and remaining completely aware of every potential threat or distraction around her, because in her mind, the battlefield was a series of equations, probabilities, and variables that must be mastered for success. And as the shot struck perfectly, the flag at the target collapsing in alignment, Emily allowed herself a brief, controlled exhale, her mind already running through data to understand why, how, and what could be improved, because mastery was never static, and even a perfect shot could be analyzed for refinement. And as the rival sniper, still reeling from the previous impossible attempt, watched silently, Emily knew that she had earned more than respect. She had established dominance in skill, anticipation, and composure, and yet she refused to allow pride to cloud judgment, because every shot was practice for the next, every challenge a chance to push limits. And as instructors began discussing the unbelievable calculations required, whispering about wind tables, atmospheric effects, and trajectory modeling, Emily already began planning the next exercise, the next target, considering moving targets, environmental variables, and timing scenarios that would push her skill further. And as she scanned the valley for subtle changes in terrain, distant heat mirages, and minor environmental shifts, she mentally mapped multiple trajectories simultaneously, preparing for every contingency, because the impossible was no longer a single shot. It was a continuous pursuit of perfection, precision, and anticipation. And while the rest of the team debated how such a shot could have been possible, Emily quietly adjusted her scope, feeling the familiar hum of concentration settle over her, every nerve, muscle, and thought aligned toward execution. And when a nearby instructor asked how she could calculate so many variables simultaneously, she only smiled faintly, knowing that mastery was measured in silence, observation, and calculation. And as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the desert, Emily continued her drills, eyes unblinking, mind alert, muscles ready, because the impossible was now a standard, and her legend as Hawk, the sniper who could turn physics itself into a tool of precision, was only beginning to form. And somewhere in the distance, the rival sniper's glare hardened, not in challenge, but in reluctant recognition that Emily Dawson had transformed a dare into a statement of skill, patience, and calculation, and that no training, no exercise, no adversary could replicate the combination of focus, nerve, An instinct that allowed her to turn impossible into reality, and as she exhaled, adjusted her aim and prepared for the next target, she felt the quiet thrill of anticipation for the challenges yet to come, knowing that the impossible was only the starting line, and that her journey, her legend, and her mastery would continue to grow, shot by shot, calculation by calculation, until every doubt, every skeptic, and every obstacle had been met, and bested, by the precision, patience, and unshakable nerve of Emily Hawk Dawson. Specialist Emily Hawk Dawson lowered her rifle after recalibrating for the morning drills, the desert air shimmering with heat waves, the distant canyon walls blurred by mirages, and the entire training team holding their collective breath, because today wasn't just practice. It was the moment she would demonstrate that the impossible 3,800-meter shot was not a fluke, and as she adjusted her scope, noting every subtle change in wind, air density, and elevation, she felt the familiar hum of focus settle into her muscles, nerves, and mind, the same calm determination that had guided her through countless hours of preparation. And when the commanding officer called out the target coordinates, a remote outpost at the edge of the valley, Emily's eyes narrowed, calculating trajectory, bullet drop, Coriolis effect, and the subtle influences of heat, humidity, and air pressure, while simultaneously observing rival snipers, instructors, and teammates, each waiting to see if the Hawk could repeat her legendary shot or falter under expectation. And she allowed herself no distraction, no hesitation, only the methodical, deliberate process of analysis, adjustment, and execution, because precision demanded perfection, and perfection required absolute control over every variable. And as she lined up the crosshairs, Emily adjusted her breathing, heartbeat, and cheek position against the rifle stock, making minute, almost imperceptible tweaks, micro-adjustments that would shift the bullet path by centimeters at extreme range, and she visualized the trajectory, the air currents, the subtle sway of the distant target, and the slight vibrations of the earth beneath her, all converging into one precise path, one perfect calculation, one shot that would either confirm her skill or cast doubt upon it. And as she exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in the valley, she squeezed the trigger with absolute control, the rifle whispering as the projectile left the barrel, carrying Emily's calculations across the impossibly long desert expanse, invisible to the naked eye but guided with meticulous precision by anticipation, skill, and absolute focus. And as the bullet arced gracefully, responding to her every micro-adjustment, it struck the distant target exactly as calculated, a flag collapsing in perfect alignment, a sensor triggered in the monitoring equipment, and a stunned silence falling over the training team, rival snipers frozen, instructors exchanging shocked glances, and teammates whispering in awe, because at that instant, Emily had transformed theoretical mastery into undeniable reality, and as she slowly lowered her rifle, her calm exterior betraying none of the adrenaline surging through her veins, she allowed herself the faintest smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the perfection she had just executed, while the rival sniper from the opposing team scowled, muttering curses under his breath, disbelief etched across his face because even he could not deny what had just occurred, a demonstration of skill, nerve, patience, and precision that few could comprehend, let alone replicate. And as instructors began discussing the logistics of the shot, trajectory, environmental factors, and the subtle calculations that had made it possible, Emily's mind was already moving forward, analyzing data, visualizing new scenarios, calculating alternative approaches, and mentally preparing for challenges yet to come, because mastery was never static, and the impossible was now the baseline for what she would achieve next. And as her teammates approached to congratulate her, some in awe, others shaking their heads in disbelief, Emily maintained her calm, professional demeanor, acknowledging respect with a nod, a smile, or a quiet word, because she understood that legend was built not only on action but on the perception of those who witnessed it, and that every movement, every shot, every calculation contributed to the quiet mythology that was forming around Specialist Hawk, a reputation that would follow her through every training exercise, every live operation, and every battlefield encounter yet to unfold. And as she scanned the horizon for the next potential target, for the next calculation, for the next challenge, she felt the subtle thrill of anticipation, knowing that the impossible had been proven once, but that true mastery demanded repetition, adaptation, and continuous evolution. And as the sun climbed higher, casting its harsh light over sand, rocks, and distant ridges, Emily Dawson reflected silently on what it meant to be more than a soldier, more than a sniper, more than a trainee, and instead, a force capable of bending physics, defying limits, and transforming theoretical skill into concrete reality, a living example of patience, nerve, and lethal precision. and somewhere in the distance the rival sniper's glare hardened, not in challenge but in begrudging acknowledgement as Emily Hawk Dawson had once again turned the impossible into undeniable proof, creating awe, respect, and whispered legend. Because every observer now knew that she was more than practice, more than calculation, more than training. She was a sniper whose skill redefined limits, whose focus could not be shaken, whose nerve could not be broken, and whose legend had officially begun, shot by shot, calculation by calculation, each impossible feat a testament to her unyielding mastery. And as the team moved forward to the next exercise, Emily's mind never wavered, already planning, already anticipating, already visualizing the next impossible shot that would further cement her name, her skill, and her presence in the annals of sniper history, because the first strike was only the beginning, and the story of Hawk had only just begun. After Emily Hawk Dawson had executed the impossible 3,800-meter shot twice, sending whispers of awe through instructors and muttered curses through rival snipers, the tension in the training ground shifted, because now the challenge was no longer theoretical, it was personal, and her rival sniper, previously arrogant and dismissive, began actively plotting to test, sabotage, and undermine her at every opportunity, moving silently in the shadows during exercises, leaving subtle traps, unpredictable variables and environmental anomalies designed to push Hawk beyond her limits. And as Emily adjusted her scope on yet another distant target, she could feel the presence of calculated observation, a silent pressure that demanded not only technical skill but mental acuity, anticipation, and adaptability. And while she continued her calculations for wind, humidity, elevation, and bullet drop, she simultaneously observed the patterns of the opposing sniper, noting movements, timing, and environmental interactions, because in this game of shadows, understanding the adversary was as critical as understanding the physics of the shot. And as the rival attempted a surprise flanking maneuver during a moving target exercise, Emily anticipated the shift instantly, adjusting her posture, grip, and scope angle, micro-correcting for wind eddies, temperature gradients, and trajectory. And as the shot left her rifle, striking the moving target precisely, she saw a flash of disbelief in her rival's eyes, followed by a grudging acknowledgement that she was more than capable, that the impossible was now her standard. And yet, the game had escalated, because with skill acknowledged came the need for strategy, anticipation, and prediction of both human and environmental variables. And as the day progressed, Emily's focus never wavered, calculating multiple potential shots simultaneously, predicting wind currents, mirage effects, and even enemy awareness, while the rival sniper continued subtle interference, dropping obstacles, adjusting range markers, even leaving decoy targets, each designed to test Emily's composure, speed, and decision-making under pressure. And she adapted instinctively, every shot a combination of anticipation, calculation, and flawless execution. And as the instructors watched, notes and whispers in the background, they realized that what they were witnessing was more than training. It was evolution of skill, nerve, and precision under active challenge. And Emily's teammates, some still skeptical, some openly admiring, began to shift in perception, understanding that Hawk was no longer merely a trainee performing drills. She was a force to be reckoned with, a sniper capable of dominating scenarios that tested human limits, because she not only calculated physics and trajectory but also read the battlefield, predicted adversaries' intentions, and adjusted strategy in real time. And as a moving target exercise reached its climax, with the rival sniper attempting the most complex interference yet, Emily's mind mapped trajectories, timing, and wind currents simultaneously, micro-adjusting for elevation and mirage. And as she squeezed the trigger, the bullet struck with lethal accuracy, neutralizing the challenge in a way that left instructors whispering in disbelief, teammates cheering quietly, and the rival snapping his jaw in frustration, all while Emily remained calm, breathing steady, heart controlled, and mind already calculating the next engagement, because mastery demanded perpetual anticipation and refinement, and she understood that every challenge presented by the rival sniper was a lesson, every obstacle an opportunity to grow, and every interference a chance to prove that skill, nerve, and precision were greater than arrogance, competition, or sabotage. And as the day waned and shadows stretched across the desert valley, Emily continued her exercises, adjusting for subtle wind shifts, changing temperatures, and the rival's constant, shadowed attempts to undermine her, all while maintaining perfect composure, executing impossible shots, and silently building her reputation, because the shadow competition was no longer just a test. It was a proving ground for legend. And as instructors discussed her performance, acknowledging the precision, speed, and adaptability she displayed, Emily already visualized the next scenario, the next environmental challenge, the next impossible shot that would cement her mastery. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over rocks, sand, and distant ridges, Emily realized that true mastery was never solitary, never static, and never predictable, because opponents, variables, and challenges evolved constantly, and only by anticipating, adapting, and executing flawlessly could one remain unbeatable. And somewhere, hidden in the dust and heat, her rival sniper seethed, planning the next interference, unaware that every attempt only honed Hawk's skill, sharpened her anticipation, and strengthened the legend that was quietly forming around her name, Emily Hawk Dawson, sniper of precision, nerve, and unflinching focus, whose impossible shots were no longer rare feats but the standard by which all others would be measured. And as Emily lowered her rifle at the end of the day, scanning the horizon, calculating potential threats, and adjusting her mental map of the valley, she smiled faintly, knowing that every shadowed challenge only made her stronger, every interference only made her sharper, and that the story of Hawk, the sniper who could anticipate, outthink, and outshoot any rival, was only beginning, because the impossible was now expected, mastery demanded evolution, and her legend was being written in every shot, every calculation, and every silent, unblinking observation of the battlefield that stretched endlessly before her. Specialist Emily Hawk Dawson stepped into the live-action field exercise, the desert stretching endlessly before her, heat waves shimmering above sand and rock, and every instinct screaming focus, because this was no controlled training drill, no static target practice. It was a test of skill under real-world conditions, with moving targets, unpredictable wind, sudden shifts in temperature, and the constant pressure of executing impossible shots while teammates relied on her precision. And as she crouched behind a jagged ridge, scanning the valley with her scope, calculating wind gradients, bullet drop, Coriolis effect, and mirage distortion simultaneously, she knew that every decision, every calculation, and every movement could have real consequences. And as distant targets began moving along rugged terrain, she tracked each trajectory in her mind, predicting paths, angles, and potential micro-adjustments required for accuracy over extreme distances, while simultaneously remaining aware of possible interference from her rival sniper, whose shadowed presence had become an unspoken threat throughout training. And as Emily adjusted her position, ensuring minimal exposure and maximum stability, she factored in not just the environmental variables, but also the human element, team communication, enemy awareness, and timing of movements, because at this level, precision required synchronization of mind, body, and surroundings. And as the first moving target crested a ridge, she exhaled slowly, allowing her pulse to steady, her hand to relax on the stock, and her finger to hover lightly on the trigger, because even the slightest tension could ruin the shot. And as she squeezed, the rifle whispered, and the bullet arced perfectly, accounting for distance, elevation, wind shifts, and target movement, striking with surgical accuracy, while the rival sniper's subtle attempts at interference, a dust kick, a faint whistle, a shadow across her peripheral vision, were anticipated and neutralized by Emily's razor-sharp focus. And as the second target moved, she calculated compensation for the shifting wind, temperature changes, and even the heat mirage bending the visual perception of the target, micro-adjusting her scope in real time, fingers steady, breathing controlled, eyes unblinking. And as the shot left her rifle, striking dead center, instructors and teammates alike watched in stunned silence, while the rival scowled, disbelief etched into his features. Because Emily Hawk Dawson had not only mastered static impossible shots, but now dominated dynamic scenarios that combined extreme distance, environmental chaos, and real-time adjustments. And as targets continued moving unpredictably across the rugged terrain, Emily recalculated instantly, anticipating wind shifts, slope variations, and target speed with a combination of instinct, training, and raw mental acuity. And as each successive shot connected, she felt the subtle thrill of control, mastery, and precision, the realization that preparation, observation, and relentless calculation allowed her to manipulate variables that most snipers would consider uncontrollable. And while the desert sun climbed higher, reflecting off rocks and sand, Emily never allowed herself to be distracted by fatigue, awe, or the tension of expectation, because every second mattered, and every shot carried the weight of consequence. And as the exercise escalated, introducing multiple moving targets, sudden changes in wind direction, and simulated enemy fire, Emily adapted seamlessly, repositioning her body, recalculating trajectories, and executing shots with flawless precision, while the rival sniper attempted increasingly audacious interference, only to find his every effort anticipated, countered and rendered ineffective by Hawk's unparalleled focus and tactical awareness, and as instructors took notes, whispering about trajectory data, micro-adjustments and real-time calculation. Under pressure, Emily's mind remained one step ahead, already plotting the next engagement, visualizing every possible variable, and maintaining an almost supernatural calm, because she understood that true mastery demanded anticipation, preparation, and flawless execution under extreme conditions. And as the final moving target sprinted across a jagged canyon ridge, Emily adjusted for wind, slope, temperature gradients, and even the subtle hum of heat waves bending light, and as she exhaled and squeezed the trigger, the bullet struck perfectly, eliciting a mix of awe, disbelief, and admiration from every observer, while the rival sniper's frustration reached a boiling point, and Emily allowed herself only the briefest flicker of satisfaction, because in her mind, each perfect shot was not a moment to celebrate, but an opportunity to learn, to refine, and to anticipate the next impossible scenario. And as the exercise concluded, instructors and teammates whispered, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others quietly praising her precision, but all aware that Hawk had just demonstrated a level of skill, nerve, and adaptability that transcended ordinary training. And as Emily lowered her rifle, scanning the rugged terrain for any subtle changes that might affect future shots, she felt the familiar thrill of anticipation, knowing that no environment, no moving target, and no rival interference could unseat the focus, calculation, and mastery she had cultivated. And as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the desert valley, Emily Hawk Dawson stood poised, ready, and infinitely capable, a sniper whose skill had transcended theory and practice to dominate the dynamic and unpredictable realities of high-stakes field engagement. And somewhere in the distance, the rival sniper seethed, acknowledging silently that Hawk had redefined the standard, and that every challenge from here on would require ingenuity, focus, and courage equal to her own. Because she had proven beyond doubt that impossible was merely a starting point, and mastery demanded evolution, adaptability, and nerve under fire, and with every passing moment, the legend of Emily Hawk Dawson grew shot by shot, calculation by calculation, in the eyes of those who watched, waited, and understood that the impossible was no longer a dream, but a reality in her hands. Specialist Emily Hawk Dawson moved through the rugged terrain with her team, the desert sun low on the horizon, casting long shadows over jagged rocks and shimmering sand, when the first hint of danger appeared, an unexpected threat, not part of any drill, training, or calculation, and her instincts screamed alert, because the battlefield was unpredictable, and even the most meticulous preparation could be disrupted by unforeseen variables. And as she scanned the ridges and valleys ahead, she detected subtle movement, enemy combatants, hidden drones, and improvised traps that had gone unnoticed by others, but not by Hawk, whose senses, honed over countless hours of observation, calculation, and experience, picked up on every anomaly, and without hesitation she dropped to a low crouch, signaling her teammates silently to halt, analyzing the angle, distance, and potential speed of the approaching threat, micro-adjusting her scope and positioning for maximum stability, concealment, and lethal precision, while simultaneously calculating wind, air density, bullet trajectory, and environmental variables. And as the first hostile movement came into view, a rogue drone scanning the valley with a subtle hum, Emily anticipated its path, preemptively adjusting her aim to intercept the threat before it could alert or harm her team. And as she squeezed the trigger, the bullet struck with pinpoint accuracy, disabling the drone mid-air, while the team froze in awe at her instantaneous assessment and execution. And yet, the situation escalated because enemy combatants began emerging from hidden cover, some attempting flanking maneuvers, others taking high ground positions, while Emily recalculated, repositioned, and micro-adjusted with lethal efficiency, her fingers steady, her mind racing through every potential variable, because every second carried the weight of life and death. And as she executed consecutive shots, neutralizing high-threat targets while avoiding collateral risk to her team, she moved fluidly, reading terrain, wind, and enemy behavior like a living equation. And as a rogue drone appeared again, this time with evasive maneuvers designed to counter human calculation, Hawk anticipated its adjustments, predicted its trajectory, and executed a perfect intercept, all while communicating silently with her team, coordinating cover, movement, and firepower, because leadership and precision were inseparable in moments like these. And as the enemy attempted a sudden breach from a hidden canyon, Emily's calculations accounted for elevation, distance, wind, bullet drop, and environmental interference, each micro-adjustment made instinctively yet perfectly. And as she fired, the shot struck with lethal accuracy, neutralizing the immediate threat while leaving the terrain secure for her team to maneuver, and through it all her calm, methodical approach contrasted starkly with the chaos unfolding around her, because while others reacted, she anticipated, calculated, and executed, transforming unpredictability into controlled precision. And as the skirmish continued, she adjusted her focus for multiple moving threats, fluctuating wind, and shifting light conditions, each shot a combination of anticipation, calculation, and nerve, demonstrating not only lethal skill but supreme adaptability. And as the dust settled, instructors, teammates, and even rival snipers watching from a distance recognized that Hawk's ability to respond to the unexpected was unmatched, because she had turned potential disaster into demonstration of mastery, calculation, and calm under pressure. And as she scanned the horizon, already analyzing residual threats, potential movement paths, and environmental variables for the next engagement, she realized that mastery was not just in preparation, but in adaptability, nerve, and the ability to execute flawlessly under conditions no one could have predicted. And as her team regrouped, still in awe, she maintained the same quiet, professional composure, already anticipating the next series of threats, the next moving target, the next environmental variable, because in her mind, the battlefield was an ever-evolving puzzle, and she was its solver, every calculation, every observation, every shot adding to the legend she was quietly building. Emily Hawk Dawson, sniper of precision, nerve, and adaptability, whose ability to turn unexpected threats into opportunities for lethal, controlled execution had now become as legendary as her impossible 3,800-meter shots. And somewhere beyond the valley, rival snipers and instructors alike whispered in disbelief, acknowledging silently that this was no ordinary soldier, no ordinary sniper, but a force who could anticipate, calculate, and execute with perfection even when chaos unfolded around her. And as the sun dipped lower, casting jagged shadows over rock and sand, Emily adjusted her scope, scanned the horizon, recalculated trajectory, wind, and environmental factors, and prepared silently, already anticipating the next challenge, knowing that mastery was not measured by a single shot, a single engagement, or a single moment, but by the ability to adapt, survive, and execute flawlessly under the unexpected. And with every heartbeat, every calculation, and every silent breath, Emily Hawk Dawson cemented her legend as a sniper who could bend the battlefield itself to her will, and that even when threats emerged from shadows, skies, or hidden ridges, she would remain unshaken, unflinching, and deadly precise, because impossible, unpredictable, and unexpected were all part of the reality she had mastered, one shot, one calculation, and one silent, unblinking observation at a time. Specialist Emily Hawk Dawson crouched behind a jagged rock outcrop, the wind whipping sand across the desert valley, her team pinned behind scattered cover, enemy combatants advancing with unpredictable precision, and instructors observing with barely concealed tension, because this was the final challenge of the exercise, a culmination of every skill, calculation, and nerve she had honed over months. And as she adjusted her scope, she scanned the battlefield, noting wind currents shifting across ridges, temperature gradients creating mirages, and subtle changes in the enemy's movement, calculating bullet drop, Coriolis effect, and trajectory corrections in fractions of a second, while simultaneously anticipating human behavior, predicting flanking attempts, and planning escape routes for her teammates if needed. And as the first moving targets appeared across jagged terrain, she visualized their path, micro-adjusted her scope, calculated environmental variables, and squeezed the trigger with absolute control, striking with precision that left no room for error. And as the enemy scrambled to respond, she anticipated the next movement, accounting for speed, elevation changes, and wind direction, her fingers steady, breathing controlled, mind entirely focused, and yet fully aware of the broader picture, because mastery required both lethal accuracy and battlefield awareness. And as she executed shot after shot, neutralizing threats with lethal efficiency, she remained calm, analyzing, adjusting, and recalculating for each micro-movement, while her teammates moved to advantageous positions under her silent guidance, inspired by her unflinching focus and ability to command without words. And as the situation escalated, with enemy combatants converging from multiple directions, including a high ridge that threatened to sweep her team into a kill zone, Emily's mind raced through every variable, calculating angles, wind shifts, bullet velocity, mirage effects, and slope deflection, predicting where each shot must land to eliminate the threat, protect her team, and maintain control of the battlefield. And when a distant enemy sniper opened fire, she micro-adjusted her aim to strike an exposed adversary while remaining hidden and protected, neutralizing the threat before it could endanger her team, all while environmental conditions fluctuated, wind gusting unpredictably, temperature shifts bending light and altering perception, yet Hawk's focus never wavered, because she had trained for this, calculated for this, lived for this, and as she squeezed the trigger once more, hitting a moving target atop a distant ridge, the opposing team froze in disbelief, recognizing that the impossible 3,800-meter shot was only part of her mastery. And as the enemy attempted a desperate maneuver, splitting into two groups with one moving behind high rocks and the other advancing directly toward her team, Emily anticipated both, adjusting her scope, micro-correcting windage, elevation, and timing, and executing perfectly calculated shots that neutralized immediate threats while buying time for her teammates to reposition. And as instructors whispered about trajectory tables, mirage compensation, and split-second calculations, Hawk's mind was already running through contingencies, imagining every potential movement, every environmental shift, every unpredictable factor, and recalculating shots before they even became necessary, because true mastery demanded anticipation, calculation, and nerve under pressure. And when a final target appeared, a distant enemy poised on an exposed ridge with a clear shot at her team, Emily allowed herself a brief assessment, considering wind direction, elevation, mirage shimmer, bullet drop, Coriolis effect, and potential interference, while simultaneously tracking her teammates' positions and planning escape routes. And as she exhaled slowly, steadied her hand, and squeezed the trigger, the bullet arced across the valley, responding perfectly to her calculations, and struck with flawless precision, neutralizing the threat, while the enemy team scattered in disbelief, unable to comprehend the combination of focus, calculation, and nerve that had allowed a single sniper to dominate the field. And as the dust settled, Emily lowered her rifle, scanned the horizon, and allowed herself a fleeting sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had not only completed the final challenge but had done so with precision, adaptability, and composure that few could ever achieve. And yet, she remained aware that mastery was never static, that each challenge was only preparation for the next, that every shot taken, every variable calculated, and every obstacle overcome was another step in a continuous journey toward perfection. And as instructors debriefed, teammates whispered in awe, and rival snipers glared with reluctant respect, Hawk adjusted her scope one final time, scanning the distant ridges, valleys, and horizon for threats, environmental shifts, or changes in conditions, because the battlefield was never truly controlled, and even in victory, vigilance, calculation, and focus were paramount. And as she exhaled, her gaze steady and unflinching, Emily Hawk Dawson realized that the legend she had been quietly building, through impossible shots, extreme calculation, nerve, and composure, was no longer hypothetical, no longer limited to training exercises, but fully tangible, recognized, and respected by everyone who had witnessed her mastery. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows of the valley, rival snipers and observers whispered, aware that Hawk had set a new standard, and that the next challenge, the next impossible shot, or the next unforeseen threat, would require skill, nerve, and precision equal to hers, because Emily Dawson had proven that mastery was not just about hitting impossible shots. It was about anticipation, adaptation, calculation, nerve, and the quiet, unshakable presence of someone who could control chaos, dominate uncertainty, and execute flawlessly when stakes were highest. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across sand, rock, and valley floor, Emily Dawson stood poised, ready, and infinitely capable, a sniper whose focus, precision, and nerve had transformed impossible into standard, and whose legend would continue shot by shot, calculation by calculation, until the next challenge arose. And even then she would remain unflinching, unbroken, and deadly precise, because that was the way of Hawk. Specialist Emily Hawk Dawson stood alone on the ridge, the desert sun casting a fiery glow across jagged rocks, wind swirling sand around her boots, as the echoes of the day's exercises faded into a tense, expectant silence. Because although the final challenge had been completed with flawless precision, her mind was never at rest, always calculating, always anticipating, aware that mastery was not a single victory but a continuous chain of observation, adaptation, and execution. And as she scanned the valley, noting subtle changes in wind, shadows, and distant movement, she realized that the legend she had been quietly building, through impossible shots, extreme calculation, nerve, and flawless execution, had reached a threshold, recognized, feared, and respected by everyone who had witnessed her skill, yet still unknown in its full scope. And as instructors debriefed their teams, quietly discussing the improbable feats she had executed, and rival snipers muttered grudging admiration, Emily allowed herself the briefest flicker of satisfaction, tempered by the awareness that the battlefield, real or simulated, was unpredictable, unforgiving and ever-changing, and that her work, her calculations, and her readiness could never cease, because one distraction, one lapse, one miscalculation could undo everything. And yet, in that moment, standing high above the desert valley, she felt a rare clarity, the quiet thrill of anticipation, and the satisfaction of knowing that she had proven, in no uncertain terms, that impossible was merely a standard she could set, a level others could aspire to but rarely achieve. And as she lowered her scope, adjusting her grip on the rifle, her thoughts turned to the countless scenarios she had imagined, the moving targets she had conquered, the rogue threats she had neutralized, and the unpredictable variables she had turned into tools of precision, because each challenge, each shot, each micro-adjustment had been a step in a continuous journey toward mastery. And as the wind whispered across the valley, Emily's mind was already calculating trajectories, environmental factors, and potential threats, visualizing impossible shots that had yet to be attempted, and somewhere, hidden in the distant ridges, shadowed observers, rival snipers, and instructors realized that Hawk was no ordinary soldier, no ordinary sniper, but a force capable of bending variables to her will, anticipating threats before they emerged, and executing flawless precision even when chaos unfolded around her. And while her teammates were beginning to understand her skill, her nerve, and her leadership, they could not yet fully grasp the quiet intensity that defined Emily Dawson, because she had trained her mind, her body, and her instincts to operate in unison, creating a perfect equilibrium of anticipation, calculation, and execution. And as she adjusted the scope one final time, noting the shimmer of a mirage on the far horizon, the subtle shift of wind over ridges, and the potential for movement in distant valleys, Emily realized that her journey, her mastery, and her legend were far from complete, that the battlefield, real or simulated, would continue to throw unforeseen challenges, and that the impossible would always be waiting just beyond the next ridge. Yet she felt no fear, only the quiet, unshakable certainty that she could meet, anticipate, and master whatever came next. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows and painting the sky with fiery orange and purple hues, Emily Dawson lowered her rifle, surveyed the valley one last time, and allowed herself a rare moment of reflection, understanding that while her skills, her nerve, and her precision had earned her recognition, the full weight of her legend remained unspoken, unresolved, a ghostly presence felt by observers but never fully captured. And as the team gathered to debrief, whispering in awe and exchanging quiet admiration, Hawk quietly stepped aside, observing the interactions with calm detachment, because she knew that the mark of true mastery was not in praise or recognition, but in anticipation, readiness, and the ability to act flawlessly when it mattered most. And as the shadows lengthened and the desert cooled, Emily's thoughts drifted briefly to the challenges yet to come, the impossible shots she had yet to execute, and the variables she had yet to master, because she understood that mastery was not a destination but an ongoing journey, and that each engagement, each calculation, and each decision left an imprint on the legend she was quietly forging, a legend whispered about by instructors, feared by rivals, and respected by teammates. And while the desert valley fell silent, Emily Dawson remained alert, every sense attuned, every calculation running through her mind, every potential trajectory visualized, because the battlefield never slept, the impossible never rested, and the legend of Hawk, the sniper who could anticipate, calculate, and execute beyond expectation, was only beginning, leaving those who had witnessed her feats both inspired and unsettled, because the true extent of her skill remained a quiet, lingering mystery, one that would continue to unfold in future engagements, impossible shots and calculated victories, a ghostly presence in the minds of all who dared to challenge or underestimate her. And as the last light faded from the horizon, Emily Dawson adjusted her rifle, exhaled, and disappeared into the shadows of the valley, leaving behind a legacy of precision, nerve, and anticipation, and a question that would echo in every whisper, every observation, and every future challenge. Just how far could the ghost shooter truly reach, and who, or what, would be ready to meet her next impossible shot?